The world has lost a legend, and rock has lost its Prince of Darkness. Ozzy Osbourne, the bat-biting, boundary-breaking, soul-shaking frontman of Black Sabbath, is gone, dead at 76. He took his final bow just weeks ago in his home city of Birmingham. Surrounded by a roaring crowd and seated on a throne, Ozzy ended his career where it all began, and none of us knew it would be goodbye. Ozzy Osbourne's story doesn't start on a stage or in a stadium. It begins in a narrow, worn-out neighborhood in Aston, Birmingham, in the industrial heart of England, where life was built on grit and survival. He was born on December 3rd, 1948, into a working-class family where money was tight, but family ties were stronger than steel. His father, Jack Osbourne, worked nights as a toolmaker at the local car plant. His mother, Lillian, held multiple jobs including cleaning houses and working at a factory. Theirs was a crowded home, 6 children squeezed into 2 small bedrooms, with little privacy and even less comfort. But there was always noise, always movement, and always a kind of closeness that only hardship can create. As a child, John Michael Osbourne, whom the world would later know simply as Ozzy, struggled to find his place. He battled undiagnosed dyslexia and attention issues, and the school system didn't have the patience or language to understand boys like him. He was labeled lazy, slow, or disruptive. Teachers were harsh. Classmates were cruel. He was beaten up, singled out, and made to feel small. He found it hard to focus in class, hard to read, and harder still to dream. But even then, there was something in him. A strange sense of humor, a mischievous charm, and a deep love for music. Everything changed when he heard the Beatles for the first time. Their voices didn't just fill the air. They cracked open something inside him. It was the first time he felt like maybe there was a place in the world for a boy like him. He couldn't play an instrument. He didn't understand music theory, but he knew what it felt like. He knew how to feel, and maybe that would be enough. In his teens, Ozzy drifted through a series of odd jobs: plumbing apprentice, slaughterhouse worker, even a brief stint in jail after being caught stealing. Life seemed directionless. Until music called. He formed a band with neighborhood friends: Tony Iommi on guitar, Geezer Butler on bass, and Bill Ward on drums. They called themselves Earth at first, and like most local bands, they played bluesy rock and hoped for a break. But it wasn't until they leaned into something darker that they discovered their true identity. Inspired by horror films and the power of fear, they rebranded themselves as Black Sabbath. They wanted to sound like nightmares. Their music was heavy, slow, ominous, and completely different from anything else in the 1960s. And Ozzy, with his eerie, nasally wail and otherworldly presence, became the center of it all. He didn't sing like an angel. He sounded like a ghost, and that's what made him unforgettable. Their debut album hit in 1970, and from there, everything exploded. Paranoid, Master Reality, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Each release more groundbreaking than the last. While other bands were singing about love and rebellion, Black Sabbath sang about war, addiction, despair, and the occult. Parents were terrified. Teenagers were obsessed. And Ozzy stood in the middle of it all, grinning, howling, spinning like a man possessed. But behind the success was chaos. Ozzy's drug use became uncontrollable. Alcohol flowed like water. Cocaine lined every table. He wasn't living. He was surviving, numbing, escaping. The very fame he dreamed of became a thing that tried to swallow him whole. By 1979, after more than a decade of groundbreaking music and self-destruction, his bandmates made the painful decision to fire him. He was devastated, lost. He thought it was over. It should have been, but it wasn't. That's when Sharon came in. Sharon Arden, the daughter of a ruthless music manager, saw something in Ozzy that even he couldn't see anymore. She believed in him. She picked him up off the floor, sometimes literally, and helped him rebuild from the ashes. Under her guidance, Ozzy launched a solo career that wasn't just successful, it was legendary. His first solo album, Blizzard of Oz, featured Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley, songs that became anthems across generations. His stage persona got darker, more theatrical. He wore black eyeliner, long leather coats, and crosses around his neck like armor. And the madness never stopped. He bit the head off a dove during a record label meeting. Then, infamously, he bit the head off a bat on stage. Thinking it was fake, he peed on a historic monument in Texas. He mumbled, he stumbled, he shocked the world. And through it all, fans couldn't look away. But Ozzy wasn't just a wild man. He was a survivor. He was a husband, a father, and beneath the chaos, someone who truly loved people. He had 5 children, Jessica and Louis from his first marriage, and Amy, Kelly, and Jack with Sharon. In the early 2000s, Ozzy became a household name all over again to the MTV reality series The Osbournes. He wasn't just the Prince of Darkness anymore. He was a dad in slippers, yelling at the remote control, trying to figure out how to work the microwave. He was hilarious, confused, vulnerable, and beloved. But as the decades passed, the price of that wild life began to show. Ozzy's health started to decline. Years of abuse had taken a toll on his body. In 2020, he revealed to the public that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. It was a painful admission from a man who had always seemed unkillable. His movements slowed, his speech faltered, but still, he kept creating. He kept recording. He kept showing up. In July 2025, Ozzy performed one final time in his hometown of Birmingham. It was called Back to the Beginning, and he sat on a throne, surrounded by the men who had started it all with him. It was beautiful, painful, a full-circle moment. It felt like a final goodbye, even though no one wanted to admit it. Just a few weeks later, the news came. Ozzy Osbourne had died at the age of 76. The world went quiet, and then it cried. Tributes poured in from every corner of the earth. Fans, musicians, critics, and even those who once feared him now mourned him. They didn't just lose a rock star. They lost a symbol of survival, a voice that told them it was okay to be broken, strange, loud, and lost. Ozzy made darkness feel human. He made misfits feel seen. Ozzy Osbourne's personal life has always been a swirling storm of contradiction, chaos, and surprising tenderness. On stage, he was a howling face of metal, spitting blood, swearing like a sailor, screaming through walls of distortion. But when the lights dimmed and the crowd went home, Ozzy Osbourne was also a deeply emotional, often broken, and very human man. Someone who loved his family, struggled with intimacy, and wrestled with his identity more than the public ever realized. When it comes to the question of Ozzy's sexuality, it's something that's been whispered about for decades. The rumors didn't come from nowhere. They emerged in the haze of his wildest years, when drugs and alcohol dissolved boundaries and blurred lines. There were stories, strange, outlandish stories, of wild parties, open experimentation, and moments that suggested he may have been curious about or open to relationships that didn't always fit the mold. He never confirmed being gay or bisexual. He never labeled himself. In fact, most times the questions were brushed off with laughter or drowned in slurred responses that revealed more exhaustion than clarity. To Ozzy, identity was never something that needed to be printed on a banner or turned into a headline. He wasn't a man of categories. He was a man of experience. And like many who lived through the freewheeling, anything-goes culture of the 1970s and 80s rock scene, his understanding of sexuality was probably more fluid than rigid. Whether he was straight, bi, or something in between, he lived most of his public life as a straight man, but never the kind to ridicule or reject people for who they loved. On the contrary, Ozzy's fan base was filled with outsiders, misfits, and people who'd been pushed aside by society, and he embraced them all. His openness was less about orientation and more about energy. He wasn't afraid of being strange. He wasn't afraid of the questions. And even if he never came out publicly, he radiated a sense of freedom that made a lot of queer fans feel seen, heard, and accepted. In a world where masculinity in rock music was often tied to bravado and domination, Ozzy made room for vulnerability. He cried, he stumbled, he needed help, and in doing so, he gave permission for others to show softness too. But where Ozzy's heart really lived was in his family. He was married twice. His first marriage, to Thelma Riley, happened in the early 1970s when his life was just beginning to spin out of control. Together they had 2 children, Jessica and Louis. Ozzy has often admitted that he was not a good father during that time. His addiction consumed everything. He wasn't present. He wasn't reliable. And he carries guilt for that even into his final years. He missed birthdays. He missed milestones. He missed a chance to really know them the way he wished he had. There were years of distance, years of pain. But despite all that, he never stopped loving them. And in his later years, there were efforts to repair what had been broken. Conversations were had, apologies were made, and in the fragile space of reconciliation, there was growth. Then came Sharon. If Ozzy was a hurricane, Sharon was the steel that held them together. They met when she was working for her father, Don Arden, a powerful and ruthless music manager. Sharon saw something in Ozzy that almost no one else did, a spark buried beneath the addiction, the self-loathing, and the spectacle. She didn't just fall in love with him. She fought for him. She managed his solo career, pulled him out of drug dens, cleaned up after him, protected him from the industry, and at times from himself. Their love was volcanic, full of screaming matches, betrayals, and even violence. There were moments when it seemed they might not survive each other. But through it all, they stayed together. Married in 1982, they went on to raise 3 children, Amy, Kelly, and Jack. Each of the Osbourne children had their own path, their own pain, and their own complicated relationship with the man they called Dad. Amy, the most private, chose to stay out of the limelight, declining to participate in the family's MTV show. She once said she loved her family, but didn't want her life turned into entertainment. It was a mature and difficult choice, and Ozzy respected her for it, even if it hurt a little to see her step away. Kelly, on the other hand, became a star in her own right. Outspoken, fiery, and stylish, she mirrored Ozzy in many ways. Unapologetic, emotional, a survivor of her own demons. She battled addiction, just like her father, and together, they shared the painful, beautiful experience of sobriety and relapse, of loving someone who was hurting, and learning how to forgive both them and yourself. Jack, the youngest, also struggled with addiction, but turned his life around to become a devoted father, documentary filmmaker, and advocate for health awareness after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. His bond with Ozzy was especially strong in the final years. They did projects together. They traveled. They laughed. They supported each other in ways that showed healing was possible, even in a family built on broken glass. The Osbourne home was not a fairy tale. It was messy, loud, full of barking dogs, yelling teenagers, laughter, rehab stints, and reality TV producers. But there was love, deep, aching love. They fought. They made up. They failed each other. And then they tried again. In the years before his death, Ozzy became more reflective. He spoke more often about the things that mattered, his regrets, his gratitude, his fears. He told stories about his childhood with tear in his voice. He talked about Sharon like she was the reason he was still alive. He laughed about old arguments with Kelly. He marveled at Jack's strength. He accepted that some relationships, like those with his older children, might never be perfect, but he kept reaching out anyway. Family wasn't easy for Ozzy, but it was everything. He built his life around the people who stood by him, even when he gave them every reason not to. And in the end, when his body began to fail, it was his family who carried him through surgeries, through diagnoses, through final concerts and final moments. And maybe that's the most powerful part of the Ozzy Osbourne story, that behind the eyeliner, the blood, the chaos, and the screaming, there was a man who just wanted to be loved, who made music that gave voice to pain, who raised kids in the middle of a storm, who held on to his wife's hand through 40 years of fire, who never stopped trying, even when he couldn't speak clearly, even when he couldn't walk. The world saw a rock god, but those closest to him saw a husband, a father, a flawed, frightened, deeply human soul who lived loudly, loved fiercely, and, in the end, found peace. Ozzy Osbourne's lifestyle was a contradiction of extremes, wild and reckless in his youth, softer and surprisingly domestic in his older years. He lived like a myth in the early chapters of his fame, and then like a man slowly trying to reclaim himself in the later ones. There were 2 Ozzies, really. The Prince of Darkness who roared through hotel rooms, and the aging father who fed his dogs, watched documentaries, and worried about his health. In the beginning, his lifestyle was everything you'd expect from a rock legend turned loose in the 1970s and 80s. He lived fast and hard, and often as if he had no intention of making it past 30. He drank until his memory collapsed. He popped pills by the handful. He took acid until he couldn't tell what was real. There were weeks lost entirely to blackouts, days where he'd wake up in a different country with no recollection of how he got there. It wasn't glamorous. It was chaotic. He didn't party for the image. He did it because there was a hole inside him. And for years, drugs and alcohol seemed like the only things that filled it. He once confessed that he didn't take drugs to be cool. He took them to feel something, or sometimes to feel nothing at all. There was darkness in Ozzy that went deeper than eyeliner or stage effects. It came from childhood trauma, from mental illness, from a self-loathing that crept in when the crowds disappeared and the silence came. And for a long time, that darkness dictated his lifestyle. He wasn't just a man in pain. He was a man at war with himself. But as the years went on, something shifted. He got older. His body started breaking down. And slowly, the whirlwind began to calm. He didn't stop being Ozzy, not by a long shot, but he began to make room for peace. He got serious about rehab. He took steps toward sobriety, even though he fell down more than once. And he began to embrace the quieter parts of life. In his later years, Ozzy developed a surprisingly wholesome routine. He loved walking his dogs. He had a real affection for animals, particularly dogs and cats, and always kept several around the house. He found comfort in them, especially when his body hurt too much for anything else. He spent long afternoons sitting in the garden, feeding the birds, enjoying the sunshine on his face. That wasn't the Ozzy fans expected to hear about, but it was the truth. The man who once snorted ants off the pavement became someone who treasured silence. He loved documentaries, especially anything about history or war. He had a real curiosity about the world. He could sit for hours watching old black and white footage, asking questions about battles, about people, about things far removed from the music industry. That side of him, curious, thoughtful, even nerdy, was rarely seen on stage, but it was there all along. He also had a deep love for painting and drawing. It wasn't something he advertised, but Ozzy would often sit for hours sketching when he couldn't sleep. His art was strange and emotional, full of chaos and color. It helped him cope with anxiety and depression, especially in years when touring was no longer an option. Art became a kind of therapy for him, a way to work through the noise in his head. And of course, he loved being with his family. Sharon was his anchor, even in the worst of times. He enjoyed just sitting next to her, watching TV, holding hands. He loved spending time with his kids and grandchildren, telling old stories, listening to their music, teasing them about their fashion. He was still Ozzy. There was always a joke, always a wild comment. But he also became, in his own way, a soft-spoken elder. Despite his many personal battles, Ozzy had a generous heart. He donated regularly to addiction recovery centers and mental health organizations, often without any publicity. He knew what it meant to be lost, and he wanted to give others the tools to find their way back. He was especially supportive of organizations that helped young people with depression, having spoken openly about his own suicidal thoughts and bipolar disorder. He was also known to step in quietly when tragedy struck a fan or a fellow artist. If a roadie was injured, if a local musician fell on hard times, if someone from the touring crew lost a loved one, Ozzy would send money. No press release, no spotlight, just help. One of his most personal causes was supporting veterans. He often talked about how much he respected soldiers, particularly those struggling with PTSD, and contributed to several charities aimed at helping wounded service members. He felt a kinship with them. Like him, they carried invisible wounds. As his health declined in the final decade of his life, Ozzy's lifestyle became slower, quieter, and more reflective. He spent more time with Sharon in their peaceful UK estate. He read more. He prayed more, even though his relationship with religion had always been complicated. He said he believed in something, though he wasn't sure what. But he hoped there was a heaven, and he hoped he'd earned his way there. He lived long enough to be at peace with who he was. Not just Ozzy the rock star, but Ozzy the survivor, Ozzy the husband, Ozzy the father, Ozzy the flawed, beautiful, broken man who had lived more lives than most of us could imagine, and somehow made it to the end with love still in his heart. Ozzy Osbourne's net worth was a result of decades spent in the unforgiving but rewarding machine of the entertainment industry. At the time of his death, his fortune was estimated to be around $220 million, a figure that reflected not just his musical achievements, but also his astonishing ability to reinvent himself across generations, markets, and mediums. But that number alone doesn't tell the full story. Ozzy's financial legacy wasn't built overnight, and it didn't come without cost, both literal and emotional. In the earliest years of his career with Black Sabbath, Ozzy didn't see the kind of money one might expect. Like many young musicians in the 1970s, he signed contracts that heavily favored record labels and managers. He and the rest of the band were often touring relentlessly, playing to packed crowds, selling records by the millions, yet finding very little in their own bank accounts. For a while, Ozzy lived with barely more than pocket change, even when his face was plastered on walls all across the world. It wasn't until he was fired from Black Sabbath in 1979 that his financial destiny truly began to change. At what looked like his lowest point, broke, drug-addicted, and spiraling, Ozzy was rescued both emotionally and strategically by Sharon Arden, who would later become his wife. Sharon believed in Ozzy when no one else did. She helped him launch his solo career, and that career became even more successful than Black Sabbath had been. His solo albums sold in the tens of millions. Tours across the globe brought in massive revenue. From 1980's Blizzard of Oz to later records like No More Tears, Ozzy built a catalog that kept paying him well into the streaming era. Licensing deals for songs like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley brought in millions more over time, especially as they became staples in commercials, sports events, video games, and movies. Concerts were a major pillar of his wealth. Even well into his 60s and early 70s, Ozzy remained a box office juggernaut. His performances were often theatrical and unpredictable. His antics kept fans coming back, and tickets sold out fast. Despite numerous health issues and multiple farewell tours, the money never stopped flowing. He was among the highest-grossing live rock acts in the world during multiple decades. And then there was the Osbournes, the MTV reality series that premiered in 2002 and changed everything. The show didn't just make Ozzy and Sharon household names. It also turned their children into celebrities and brought in a completely new wave of wealth. Ozzy was already rich, but after the Osbournes, he became a pop culture institution. The show ran for 4 seasons, pulling millions of viewers each week and spawning endorsements, merchandising, book deals, and speaking opportunities. Sharon's business savvy also helped multiply the family fortune. She managed Ozzy's brand with laser precision, securing long-term licensing agreements and creating opportunities where most would have seen chaos. Sharon helped make the Osbourne name a lifestyle brand, not just a band legacy. Outside of music and television, Ozzy's money came from a variety of other streams. He invested in real estate, owning lavish properties in Los Angeles, Buckinghamshire, and beyond. These homes not only served as personal retreats, but also appreciated greatly in value over time. At one point, the Osbournes were reportedly making significant income simply from renting out their Beverly Hills mansion. Ozzy also made money through merchandise, everything from t-shirts and collectible figurines to limited edition vinyls and Halloween costumes. His face and name were everywhere. He even lent his voice and likeness to video games and animated shows, tapping into younger audiences who hadn't even been born when Black Sabbath first formed. Later in life, his autobiography, I Am Ozzy, became a bestseller. Fans were eager to hear his story in his own words. The book deals, speaking tours, and publishing rights added another revenue stream to a career already flooded with income sources. Still, his wealth came at a price. Years of addiction and medical treatment, countless lawsuits, tour cancellations, and financial missteps chipped away at the fortune over time. Yet, somehow, Ozzy always bounced back, often more profitable than before. Even in the face of Parkinson's disease and numerous surgeries, he remained a business. He wasn't just a man. He was a brand, a machine. In the end, what made Ozzy's financial legacy so unique wasn't just a number in the bank. It was how many ways he found to earn it, from the dark basements of Birmingham to the bright lights of Hollywood, from heavy metal stages to reality TV, from wild antics to heartfelt interviews. Every piece of Ozzy's life was part of the package, and people paid to be part of the ride. Ozzy Osbourne died in the United Kingdom at the age of 76, closing the final chapter of a life that was anything but ordinary. His passing came not long after what many now recognize as a farewell moment. Black Sabbath's emotionally charged back-to-beginning concert in Birmingham, where Ozzy, fragile yet determined, sat on a throne and soaked in the love of a hometown crowd that had grown up with him, mourned with him, cheered for him, and in many ways been transformed by him. To those who were there, it felt like a last bow. In hindsight, it was a gift, a final performance where Ozzy got to hear the roar of gratitude before the silence of goodbye. The official cause of death has not been publicly confirmed at the time of this writing, but his years of well-documented health battles likely played a part. In the last decade of his life, Ozzy faced an avalanche of medical issues. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2020, a moment that rocked the music world and brought even more public empathy to a man already known for surviving everything from addiction to nearly fatal accidents. He had multiple spinal surgeries after fall-at-home aggravated old injuries. He battled pneumonia. He canceled world tours. And yet, even in those moments when his body seemed to be failing him, his spirit never did. Friends and fans alike had watched his decline with aching hearts. But he was never one to let frailty define him. When he appeared publicly, whether on stage in interviews or through family social media updates, there was always a flicker of the same fire that once led him to bite the head off a bat on stage or scream into night as the Prince of Darkness. That flicker didn't die quietly. It burned until the very end. Ozzy's death sparked an outpouring of grief that echoed around the globe. Tributes flooded in from across generations, genres, and borders. From heavy metal gods like Metallica and Iron Maiden to pop legends like Elton John and younger acts like Youngblood, the reactions weren't just condolences. They were affirmations of what Ozzy meant to the world. Tony Iommi, his longtime friend and bandmate, said simply, "We've lost a brother." Geezer Butler reflected on how, for kids from Aston, went on to change the sound of music. Others called him an icon, a survivor, a mad genius, a misunderstood poet, a father figure, a legend, a friend. But Ozzy was never easy to define. His death only made that clearer. He was both feared and beloved, outrageous and tender, demonic on stage, but deeply human off it, a walking contradiction. And perhaps that's why he mattered so much. He gave generations of outsiders a voice. He made the weird kids feel seen. He turned pain into power and rage into rhythm. His very existence challenged the norms of what fame, masculinity, vulnerability, and aging could look like. He leaves behind not just a legacy of music, but a seismic shift in cultural impact. Without Ozzy, there would be no blueprint for so many who came after. His career spanned 6 decades, yet he remained relevant in every single one of them. He influenced not just metal, but rock, punk, grunge, and even pop. His music is taught, sampled, and worshipped. His face is immortalized in tattoos, t-shirts, and documentaries. His voice, gravelly, haunted, unforgettable, still howls from speakers in bedrooms, stadiums, and arenas around the world. But beyond all the tributes and accolades, what lingers most is the humanity he showed in the latter part of his life. The honesty with which he spoke about his struggles, his mental health, his regrets, his fears, touched fans in ways louder than any amplifier ever could. The man who once screamed in chaos became, in many ways, a gentle elder. Still wild, still Ozzy, but more reflective, more transparent, more at peace. His death isn't just the end of a life. It's the closing of a chapter in music history that may never be repeated. There will be no other Ozzy Osbourne, because Ozzy wasn't just a performer. He was a phenomenon, a storm that raged, reshaped everything in its path, and then, finally, settled into silence. But the silence will never be empty. It will be filled with echoes, and those echoes will last forever. Would you like the final section now on legacy and cultural impact, or should we circle back to include fan reactions and final tributes from celebrities?